Thank you for joining California Competes' 10th anniversary interview series. Today, I'm honored to be speaking with Lieutenant Governor Eleni Kounalakis. Eleni Kounalakis was sworn in as the 50th Lieutenant Governor of California in January 2019. She made state election history by being the first woman elected to the post. Lieutenant Governor Kounalakis previously served as the ambassador to Hungary after spending 18 years as an executive in the housing development industry. A California native, she's served on numerous boards and commissions throughout her career, including California's First Five Commission, the San Francisco War Memorial, and the San Francisco Port Commission. She graduated from Dartmouth College, earned her MBA from UC Berkeley's Haas School of Business, and holds an honorary doctorate of laws from the American College of Greece. Lieutenant Governor, thank you so much for joining me today. This California Competes 10th anniversary series engages higher education and workforce development leaders around California's thorniest issues. It's a privilege to have this conversation with one of the highest officials in our state, especially as you serve on several boards pertaining to post-secondary education and economic development. So, everyone has their journey. Will you tell us about your journey to becoming Lieutenant Governor, and how has your lived experience shaped how you view higher education and workforce policy?
Well, thank you so much. I often talk about my passion for public higher education in the state of California, and it really does come from a very personal part of my life and my story. My grandmother, my mother's father back in Greece, never went to school for a single day. She never learned to read, never learned to write. But she believed in the promise of America and California in particular. And she let my father leave home alone to come to the United States. He ended up in Lodi, California, 15 years old, working in the fields of California as a farm worker and going to school, of course, high school. And eventually he made his way to Sacramento and went to Sacramento State University. He didn't quite graduate. I was the first in my family to go to a four-year university and graduate, but he got an extraordinary education at Sac State. And for me, in my family, all of us in our family, we really have always recognized that the real change in the trajectory of opportunity, not just for my father, who went on to build a successful business, but for all of us, was his ability to go to Sacramento State, work his way through on a waiter's salary, and still have money left over to be able to send back to his family because there's an opportunity cost of going to school. And he paid $62 a semester, including books. So California public higher education has been instrumental in my own story. Of course, I went on to do the things you talked about, and have incredible opportunities, but it really all started from that opportunity for him to go from the fields to the classroom. And this pathway of the California dream for millions of Californians goes through the halls of public higher education in our state. So in my current job as Lieutenant Governor, part of the reason I ran for this position, and really what I've been able to roll up my sleeves and immerse myself in, is how to make the opportunities that our family has had available for future generations. And as we know, it works pretty well, but there's still a lot more that we can do.
So California Competes had the privilege of speaking with you back in 2018 when you were running for Lieutenant Governor, when we hosted the Lieutenant Governor's Forum. During that time, you had noted affordability, capacity issues, and education to workforce as challenges. And at that point, the main priorities going into the role. So now that you're the incumbent Lieutenant Governor, can you talk more about how you see California's efforts around those priorities, and the progress that we've made, and the things that you still think really need to be further tackled?
Well, that's a really big question. The answer is we've been making progress on these very issues of affordability, accessibility, representation. We've been making progress, but we still have a lot of work to be done. So, of course, we know AB 705 was really a very important starting point, along with the associate's degree for transfer. Really being able to recognize that the community college system is a critically important part of what happens in public higher education in our state, because making sure that our students are prepared to transfer from the community college system is a key to hitting those goals. Yes, we have students who can come directly out of our high schools into the UC and the CSU, and that's really important and really great. But if we're really looking at accessibility, affordability, and improving representation, the key to all of that is the community college system. So the associate's degree for transfer, the AB 705 reforms, and some of the reforms that we're working on right now that, in fact, even that are on the governor's desk, are really getting to this fundamental issue, which is when we look at our students and the entirety of their educational careers in higher education, how are we starting as early as we need to in helping develop those pathways? And once they're in the four-year universities at the CSU and the UC, how can we really do more to get those graduation rates up so that students do not spend more time in the system after those first, ideally, 4 years than they need to.
One thing, in 2018, we never envisioned that we would soon be upon a global pandemic that would have devastating, impacts across the board. Can you talk a little bit about how your priorities have shifted because of the pandemic, and how you're working to navigate the pandemic and what you hope will look like as a state after?
Well, Dr. Jez, let's be clear. This pandemic has been extremely disruptive in almost every aspect of our lives. And for our students, it's been extremely difficult. Many of our students in public higher ed in this state sacrifice a lot. It's very expensive to them and to their family to be able to attend. Somewhere between 30 and 40% of our students enrolled in public higher ed in the state are the first in their family to go to college. And about 70% of the students at the CSU level reported that they would have some level of challenges in their funding sources in terms of being able to continue. So this has been a difficult time in terms of how families have had to change their lives, whether they're having financial challenges, very real health challenges, particularly in underserved communities where the virus has been more devastating. And then, of course, is this whole transition to online learning, which has changed everything. But in as much as the disruption of COVID has caused for an immediate and robust response, and again, especially around this transition to online learning, it also has created some very interesting opportunities for us to see how the protocols that we have had to utilize during COVID can actually help us in the future to expand access. And I think that we know that truly there are some opportunities to in particular use what we've learned about online education to help grow capacity in our system. One statistic I think is really telling is in the CSU system. Before the pandemic, about 95% of the courses were taught in person. Right now, as students are entering the classroom again, about 80% are taught in the classroom and about 20% are continuing online. That's really interesting because we could have debated for years over the question of if a student were to have a portion of their courses online, what would be the right percentage But here we are going from 95% in person to 80% in person, from 5% online to 20% online. It's just happening. So to me, this is the most interesting area for us to continue to explore. And then, of course, there's also, frankly, what we have learned about the impact of being able to do some of your work remotely on the cost of public higher ed to our students. If you can do a semester remotely, does that help you stay in school during a semester where you might not be able to afford the costs associated with being on campus, the housing and eating in a cafeteria or a meal plan versus being at home? So all of this is giving us enormous amounts of data and information to be able to think about using these modifications as future tools.
Well, I feel very encouraged hearing you say that. We at California Competes, online education is one of our priorities, and that's exactly what we are hoping for. Is there seems to be a real potential for us to be able to improve access, improve capacity, serve a population of Californians that haven't been well served because they can't get to a campus. So we're excited to see where this goes, and hopeful that the state will be really intentional in thinking through these models and the cost of, what should be the cost for online versus in person, and what should be delivered and for whom. And we had a recent study that came out that surveyed Californians around demand for higher ed. And we saw that 19% of Californians 25 and older said they intend to go to college in the next 2 years, which is 5.1 million adults. And 3 million of them said they prefer exclusively online. So we were surprised by the data, but hopeful that, with the pandemic, our institutions will be better prepared to serve Californians that want and need, and our state needs, for them to be able to access post-secondary ed. So one thing that is really excited about speaking with you is your role on, the UC Regents, the CSU Board of Trustees, and the Community College Board of Governors. And there's no one else that has that viewpoint across our 3 public higher ed segments. I would love to hear from you about what is it like sitting across, to have that position looking across public higher ed in California. And what are the things that strike you as you're at these tables?
Well, yes, it was really important to me and to our team to be able to engage at all levels. And frankly, the community college system is just such a critical part of the whole story of public higher ed and the master plan for higher education for the state. So we went to the leadership in the legislature, we worked with the governor's office, and we basically made this argument that there should be one member, one ex officio member who serves on all 3 to be able to begin to bring the perspective of serving on all 3 systems to each of those other systems. And let's be clear, when we talk about public higher ed in the state, the community college system is the biggest by far in terms of the number of students. It is somewhere around 2 million students currently enrolled in the community college system. And the areas and the opportunity for reform in that system, some that have already taken place and others that are sitting on the governor's desk right now, are really central. So, that AB 705 and the associate's degree for transfer that really started looking at what's going on in our community colleges and how can we get them into 4-year institutions, those who want to go. And what we found with 705 that to me was just really unbelievable is that for a variety of reasons over the years, the vast majority of students who were coming into the community college system and who were taking first level, entry level math and English were taking courses that did not get them course credit. It was remedial education. Mm-hmm. And it was something around 20% of the students enrolled in math at the community college were taking math classes that did not get them college credit. And so what AB 705 did was it said, no, any student, doesn't matter what they test into, if they want to enroll in a math class that gives them college credit, let them do it. You cannot keep them from there, right? Because before there was a threshold, they had to test into it. You can let them go in. And so students enrolling in these courses, then getting some additional help and resources, are suddenly, we're finding that from around 20% to around 70% of students enrolled in math classes in our community college system are getting 4 credit classes. Similar numbers, not quite as dramatic, but very similar for English. This is huge. We found, and Cal Competes and other NGOs and think tanks out there really saw this as a big problem, a big flaw. And that one change has opened the doors for so many more students. And so that's being followed up with 2 bills that I'm very proud to have co-sponsored that are in on the governor's desk right now. One of them that does, it's AB 111, it's common course numbering, just to make it so that if you take an algebra class at one community college, it has the same number as at another community college. And then AB 928, which is an additional level of streamlining for the process to go from community college into the CSU and the UC. And this one will, again, not to get too much into the weeds, but instead of a student coming in and opting in to an associate's degree for transfer and ADT pathway, they're automatically opted in. And if they want, they can opt out instead of the other way around. So all of this to try to make it easier and more user-friendly of a system for students. And let me just add, the reason why this is important is because the percentage of students who come in and say that they want to go off to a 4-year universities and the ones who actually make it is far too low. And the students who are at our CSU system right now, by the way, this is another piece of that process, are still only graduating at about 1 out of every 4 in 4 years for freshmen. So this space between high school and graduation from a CSU or a UC, it can, for so many students, really hinge on the community college system. And not just in terms of preparation, but really also in terms of affordability and accessibility.
I also want to flag that you chair the Governor's Council of Economic Advisors. And one thing that the California Competes has been focused on is the connection between higher ed and workforce and the economy. Can you talk a little bit about how like the state's initiatives to increase coordination in higher ed and connections between the education and employer continuum, the education and employment continuum?
Absolutely. So the governor has been really focused on this question. You remember Governor Newsom was lieutenant governor for 8 years. He sat on the CSU and the UC boards. I've seen interviews that you guys have done with him in the past. This has been very central to his policy work himself. And so it's no surprise that all of this becomes a priority for him as governor. And again, I talk about these things. I am one person who is passionate and very interested in doing more for the system in general, but there are a lot of people who recognize that critical to California's economy is our system of public higher ed and education and workforce training. So the way I see it when I draw the lens back is it's a formula. It's a formula that has worked for my family and that really has been working for California for a long time. And the formula starts with immigration. We are 27% foreign born in the state of California, 27% immigrants. The national average is about 14%. We have the largest system of public higher education in the country. The CSU, the UC, and the community college system, together of our 40 million people, almost 3 million are enrolled in one of our systems. And we are the 5th largest economy in the world. So immigration plus public higher education and education in general equals a booming, thriving, innovative economy with incredible diversity. So that to me is the big picture. When you start drilling down and saying, okay, what does that mean for policy issues? I think what's really important right now is to see it through the prism of priorities of this year's budget. It was a shock to everyone that with COVID hitting, that we ended up with one of the biggest budget surpluses at any time in history anywhere in the country, $75 billion budget surplus. So when you look at what the priorities of that budget were for Governor Newsom and for the legislature, this is, not surprisingly, what you're asking about is very central to that. Education and, fully funding the CSU, UC, community college budgets. And by the way, going all the way to the very beginning and funding a transitional year of preschool for California kids, which we know now, we are wise enough to know now that there is a correlation between kindergarten and going to college. And so getting at that, which is quite extraordinary, but funding the budgets of our systems, and then looking at other ways to prioritize workforce development. There's more than $1 billion that's been allocated in this budget for various programs around workforce development. And not surprisingly, our community college system has received additional funding as well. Now, a lot of the challenges to the workforce were happening even before COVID. We knew and have known that automation is changing the profile and what kinds of jobs there will be in the future. There was this much touted study from the PPIC saying that we would need 1 million more degrees in order to be able to fill the kinds of jobs of the future that will exist in California. So we have our work cut out for us. But we also know that, students sign up for courses very often that are directly related to the jobs that they seek to get, whether it's in programming, computer programming, or welding, or anything else. And so being able to make sure that we have enough offerings, nursing is another big one, right? Have enough to be able to really target and fund those programs that students are waiting in line the longest to get. That is my biggest hope of what the expanded budgets are going to be able to bring. That, by the way, and local partnerships, very important for the community colleges, and the kinds of partnerships that will lead to internships and apprenticeships.
You brought up the surprisingly robust revenues for the state this year, and I wanted to, I guess, elevate that, and then also the recent census data around poverty in California. With once cost of living adjustments are in, California has the highest poverty rate in the country. So I'd love to get your thoughts on, given what you just talked about, the role of education, the connections to workforce, like how is the state working to close the gap and ensure equitable educational outcomes, particularly for Californians who are currently living in poverty, that we need to create that better path for?
Well, Dr. Jez, it was heartbreaking to see that. I think it kind of sent a shudder across the state, but at the same time, people who are in elected office, people who are in public service, people who are working in nonprofit organizations and local government, we know we know that families struggle and families suffer. And we know that is very largely driven by the cost of living in our state. And the cost of living in our state is very largely driven by the cost of housing in our state. So this is not really so much in the area of public higher education, but in general, we simply need to build more housing. So the governor has signed three very important housing bills. Those will largely go to infill type development, which will help, but we really need to build more housing. And we need to look at housing in an ever with increasing urgency on our campuses of public higher education. If the market rate housing in the area is going through the roof, it's not like it used to be where you can get an apartment with a bunch of other students and it would be affordable. It just isn't like that anymore. And so we need to build more campus housing. That's critical. And one of the things that, if you see me in the board meetings, really advocating for, it's approving these projects and moving them forward in a streamlined way to get this housing built. Some of the basic issues of affordability for higher ed have to do with scholarships, Pell Grants, Cal Grants, and tuition rates, as well as cost of living. And so the federal stimulus has included expansion of Pell Grants. In the state of California, we're working very, very hard to expand access to Cal Grant opportunities, and we've done that with this budget. And then, of course, is this ongoing fight around tuition increases. You know, I said when I ran that I would throw myself into this fight to make public higher education more affordable and to fight tuition increases. We have not had any tuition increases since I came into office. However, I'm sure you saw that at the UC, the cohort-based tuition process has gone forward, which includes some automatic cost of living increases. There are some good things that did come out of the cohort-based tuition debate at the regions, some things that have made it a little more sensitive to the needs of middle-class students. With the state of California being so expensive, the dollar just does not go as far. So this conversation is definitely going to continue.
Yeah, the housing issue that you mentioned is just so fundamental. And we were excited to also see that the college housing program. I remember when I was an undergrad at Berkeley 20 years ago, the most stressful thing then was finding housing, not exams. And that was, not the housing market it is today. So I'm particularly excited that you are advising the governor on his Council of Economic Advisors, right, with your expertise in housing also.
When I was running for lieutenant governor, I went to all 58 counties. And one of my most memorable moments, I was up in Mariposa County, and there was this lovely grandmother, and she was telling me about her grandson, and she was so proud of him, a student at UC Berkeley, and he was about to graduate. But she told me that for the previous year and a half, he'd been living in his car. And I'm listening to this woman, and it's absolutely clear that her grandson did not come from a family that was food insecure and housing insecure. And yet for him to go off to a UC, he suddenly entered the ranks of those who are food and housing insecure. And that's why this budget, with, by the way, $2 billion allocated to build more housing on our campuses, $2 billion allocated. Of that, half of it is for the community college system to have housing opportunities on those campuses. This is the sea change. And my message is, don't make it more expensive by people filing NIMBY lawsuits and using CEQA to drag it out. It doesn't get us any more housing, but it drives up the cost. and that $2 billion just doesn't go as far. So that is what I really want to and will focus on over the next couple of years.
I appreciate that. And I'm glad that that is at the top of your priorities. So looking ahead, what else, I guess, are your most important priorities for the next year?
So thank you for asking that. Look, around my office, we're thinking about all kinds of different things. And what's been really great is we have a very open door now, virtually open door policy with students. And I was visiting all the campuses. Of course, that has had to be put on hold with COVID, and I hope to start it up again soon. But we hear from students and we hear the stories on a one-by-one basis. And so in so many ways, we get to think of each one of those stories as a challenge to figure out how from the bigger policy side, we can help them. So that's why something like Common Course numbering, which isn't going to gain any headlines, isn't going to be thought of as some big revolutionary change. But we know that for kids who don't have mom and dad who went to college, helping them navigate the system, that it's going to help. So lots of different things. But I will say that overall, one thing that we will be looking at, again, kind of drawing the lens back, is capacity. If we want to get to affordability, if we want to get to our goals around equity and diversity, we really have to build more capacity in the system. You know, as we get better at getting students through the associate's degree for transfer programs through our 115 community colleges, as we get better helping them navigate their way through quickly and efficiently with just the right number of credits they need and not spending too much time going around taking the wrong classes, that kind of thing, we're going to end up needing a lot more spaces, because remember, there are guarantees in that ADT program that there will be space for them in the CSU and the UC. And so we're going to have to build capacity within the CSU and the UC. And again, it goes back to the very first thing we were talking about, which is, are there things that we have learned to be able to utilize modern technology, not replace the classroom? I have 2 college kids today. I have 2 sons who are in college right now. And there is no question that in-person learning is critically important to their development, not just in learning and the brain being able to really absorb by being in a classroom with their educators, but also what they learn from the other kids around them. There's no substitute for it. But at the same time, what can we do with the tools and what we've learned during this time to essentially build capacity for far greater numbers of students without necessarily having to match it with the bricks and mortar for every piece of that expansion?
I'm cheering you on. It's so critical. I mean, as I mentioned, the 5.1 million Californians who say they want to go. If the federal American College Promise Plan passes, California is a big winner in its current formats and iterations, and we'll have more community college students who will have the benefit of the ADT, hopefully the benefit of common course numbering. So yeah, the CSU and UC, you know, it's get ready.
You know, there's just so much to be proud of. And again, I really miss being on campus with students, and I really, really look forward to being able to do that again. But it is just so incredibly inspiring. And, you know, I'll tell you, it just so happens today, the cast of Hamilton has made its way through the Capitol. To me, if you were to tell the inspiring story of our state, it really is immigration plus education. So maybe someday someone will make a musical about California public higher education, because it's a pretty beautiful story.
Lin-Manuel Miranda, if you're listening. Well, thank you so much for spending this time with us. And I look forward to seeing what's next, and we will circle back with you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jess. It's wonderful to be with you.